My name is Hannah Reed. I am 37 years old, a licensed funeral director and funeral service compliance manager in Savannah, Georgia. And at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, I walked into my brother's funeral home reopening and saw my name on an embalming license packet I had never signed. Reed Family Funeral Home looked polished from the street, the way people polish grief when they want it to look respectful before anyone checks the truth underneath. White lilies stood beside the chapel doors. Black chairs had been lined in perfect rows. A ribbon stretched across the entrance to the arrangement office. A framed photograph of my grandfather Samuel Reed hung above the guest book, and under it, my younger brother Lucas stood in a charcoal suit, holding the funeral home keys for cameras like compassion had chosen him personally. His wife Olivia was live streaming from beside a sign that said, "Reed Family Funeral Home, a legacy of compassion." My mother, Patricia, stood near him with one hand on her pearls and proud tears in her eyes. My father, Martin, a retired funeral director who knew better than anyone what a license meant, stood beside the flower cooler looking at the carpet. Then, a staff assistant handed me a black badge that said, "Floral Support," not licensed funeral director, not supervising director, not the person who had paid $16,900 in old board penalties and vendor balances, corrected 29 case file errors, fixed 11 death certificate issues, rebuilt the prepaid contract ledger, updated body transfer logs, trained 4 staff members, and stopped 2 cremation cases from moving forward without proper family authorization. Floral Support. In my hand was the old silver chapel key my grandfather had given me when I was 19, tied to a black mourning ribbon. In my tote was a black compliance folder filled with state board emails, embalming authorization forms, cremation permit warnings, death certificate corrections, body transfer logs, prepaid contract records, forged signature pages, unpaid penalty receipts, and the final license verification packet the state funeral board had emailed me that morning because my name appeared as supervising funeral director. Then my mother raised her voice in front of grieving families, staff, flower vendors, clergy, local press, and relatives and said, "Hannah only arranged flowers. Lucas was the one with the heart to comfort people." People nodded softly. Lucas lowered his eyes like praise embarrassed him. Olivia zoomed in. I pressed the chapel key into my palm and looked toward the arrangement office, where State Funeral Board Inspector Maribel Grant was already holding a tablet with my forged license packet open. Before I tell you what happened when Maribel asked who signed the embalming license and my brother dropped the keys, tell me this first. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before my family understands that compassion without consent can become another kind of harm. The funeral home was never just a business to me. It was the place where I learned that dignity has paperwork behind it. My grandfather, Samuel Reed, founded Reed Family Funeral Home in 1969 in a narrow brick building with creaking floors, a tiny chapel, and an arrangement office where he kept peppermints in the top drawer for widows who forgot to eat. He had a quiet voice, careful hands, and a rule he repeated until it became part of my bones. No one's grief gives us permission to skip consent. When I was a child, I thought funeral work was flowers, polished caskets, soft music, and people whispering in hallways. Grandpa showed me the other side. Death certificates with wrong spellings that could delay insurance. Cremation authorizations that had to be signed by the correct next of kin. Embalming consent that could not be assumed just because a family was crying. Body transfer logs that proved a loved one was where the funeral home said they were. Prepaid contracts that had to be honored exactly because families trusted them years before the need arrived. Compassion without consent can become another kind of harm, he told me when I was 15, after a neighboring funeral home nearly cremated a man before the estranged daughter with legal authority had been notified. I never forgot the fear in that daughter's voice when Grandpa explained why we checked everything twice. Lucas never heard that part, or maybe he heard it and decided it was less useful than the speeches. Lucas was the son everyone wanted in front of families. He was handsome, warm, easy with tears, and skilled at placing a hand on a grieving shoulder at exactly the right moment. He could say, "We will take care of everything," and people believed him because he looked like comfort. I was the one in the back office making sure everything had authorization. My mother called him gifted. She called me procedural. Lucas had heart. I had files. Lucas could walk a widow to the chapel and get praised for compassion. I could correct the death certificate that let her file the pension claim and get told I was good with details. My father knew the difference, but he spent years pretending the difference did not matter, because admitting it would expose how much of the old funeral home had stayed open because of me. When Lucas forgot to log a transfer, Dad said he was learning. When I stayed late rebuilding the log so the family would not be caught in a board review, Dad said, "Thank you, sweetheart," quietly enough that no one else heard. When Lucas gave a eulogy for a family friend and made half the chapel cry, Mom said Grandpa's gift had skipped me and landed in him. I was standing in the hall with a corrected obituary proof in my hand, making sure the deceased woman's middle name was spelled right because her daughter had cried over that one letter. Flowers are visible. Consent is invisible until it is missing. The old funeral home began to fail after Grandpa died. Dad took over, then slowly let fatigue and nostalgia replace discipline. Files sat unfinished. Death certificate corrections got delayed. Vendor bills stacked up. Prepaid contract ledgers were out of date. Cremation permits were filed in different drawers, depending on who had worked that week. The state board issued warnings, then penalties. Lucas floated in and out, charming families when he felt like it, talking about modernizing the business and leaving me to clean the records after his emotions got applause. I had become licensed by then. I worked in compliance for a regional funeral service group, and I knew how quickly a death care business could lose trust. I paid old penalties because Dad said cash was tight. I corrected case files. I rebuilt the prepaid ledger so families who had paid 20 years ago would not be cheated by confusion. I fixed 11 death certificate problems. I updated transfer logs. I trained staff on authorization sequences. Twice, I stopped cremation cases from moving forward because the person who had signed was not the legal authorizing agent. Both times, Mom said I was making things harder for grieving families. Both times, I said grief was exactly why we had to slow down. She looked at me like I had never loved anyone. Lucas and Olivia returned with a plan 18 months before the reopening. They wanted to revive Reed Family Funeral Home as a boutique legacy funeral home. Olivia had a marketing background and a dangerous talent for making serious obligations look like aesthetic choices. She designed a new logo, filmed soft focus reels of Lucas walking through the chapel, and wrote captions about bringing human warmth back to death care. She called the embalming room behind-the-scenes sacred preparation, which told me immediately she had never cleaned an instrument tray at midnight while a family waited for viewing confirmation. Lucas asked for my help with systems, not ownership, not authority, systems. I told him if my license touched the reopening, I needed a formal role, full access to files, final review, and no use of my name or signature without written authorization. He smiled and said, "Hannah, this is family." I said, "The state board does not license family feelings." He laughed. Mom later told me I had humiliated him with legal language. Still, I helped with drafts because grieving families would walk through those doors. I gave Lucas updated embalming authorization forms, cremation consent checklists, body transfer logs, death certificate correction templates, prepaid contract review steps, vendor account notes, and a state board readiness checklist. Every email had the same line: "Do not list me as supervising funeral director or use my license, name, signature, or templates as final approval unless I personally verify the completed files." Lucas ignored that line. Olivia replied with black heart emojis and wrote, "Grandpa would be so proud of us." Olivia's campaign became harder to watch by the week. She posted my chapel flow plan with the footer cropped. She filmed Lucas standing beside Grandpa's portrait saying, "Families need heart, not bureaucracy." She advertised private cremation guidance before the permit system had been cleaned. She promoted prepaid funeral planning while the old ledger still had 3 unresolved balances I had flagged. I texted Lucas after one post promised fully licensed care under the Reed family tradition. "Take that down until the license packet is verified." He replied, "You always think the worst." I wrote back, "No, I know what happens when death care is handled casually." Mom called 10 minutes later. "Grieving families need comfort, Hannah. They do not need you hovering with forms." I said, "Forms are how we prove comfort did not become harm." She said, "Lucas has the heart for this." I asked, "Then why does he need my license?" She hung up. The worst argument before the reopening had been over a man named Mr. Caldwell, a prepaid client whose daughter found an old contract in a drawer after he died. Lucas wanted to honor the printed package because it looked simple. I found an amendment from 2011 that changed the merchandise credit and added veteran honors his daughter had forgotten existed. Lucas said, "Do we really need to dig this deep? She is exhausted." I said, "That is why we dig." We found the missing funds, corrected the statement, and saved that family from paying twice for something already promised. Lucas gave the chapel speech, and Mom said he had carried them with grace. I sat in the office with the ledger open and a cold cup of coffee, listening to the family cry with relief over a correction they would never know had happened. Another time, a cremation authorization came in signed by a cousin because the adult son was out of state and unreachable. Lucas wanted to proceed because the cousin was basically the one handling everything. I stopped it, found the son, waited for lawful consent, and took the anger from everyone who thought waiting was cruelty. The son called me later and said, "Thank you for not letting them decide without me." I never told Mom because she would have said I was collecting proof. Maybe I was. Maybe after years of being called cold, I needed proof that caution had a pulse. The state board email arrived the morning of the reopening at 7:38. Maribel Grant from the Georgia Funeral Board wrote, "Hannah Reed, because you are listed as supervising funeral director for Reed Family Funeral Home, please verify the attached embalming license acknowledgement, cremation permit procedures, case file readiness, and prepaid contract controls before today's reopening review." My coffee went cold. I opened the attachment and saw my name under documents I had never signed. Embalming Authorization Review, Supervising Funeral Director Acknowledgement, Cremation Permit Access, Body Transfer Log Approval, Prepaid Contract Ledger Verification. My signature appeared at the bottom, copied from an old vendor account form I had signed when Dad needed emergency casket delivery 2 years earlier. The upload history showed the packet came from Reed Family Funeral Home's office computer. 6 active family cases were listed in progress. 3 prepaid funeral contracts were under review. 2 cremation permits were pending. One case involved Mrs. Elaine Porter, a 68-year-old widow arranging her husband's service after a sudden stroke. Her file had an embalming authorization marked Reviewed by Hannah Reed. I had never seen her final consent form. That was the moment the anger stopped being personal and became cold. Death care does not give you room to be almost honest. A body cannot advocate for itself. A widow should not have to wonder whether the person handling her husband had forged a license packet to open on time. I called Maribel immediately. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, the way regulators sound when they have learned that panic helps no one. I told her I had not signed the packet, had not agreed to supervise Lucas, and had warned him in writing not to use my license. She asked if I had documentation. I said yes. She said she was already scheduled to attend the reopening. "Bring the originals," she told me, "and do not sign anything they hand you there." That last sentence told me she had seen enough families hide fraud inside ceremony. I packed the black folder, refusal emails, forged signature pages, original templates with metadata, penalty receipts, case file corrections, cremation warnings, body transfer logs, death certificate fixes, prepaid ledger notes, Olivia's marketing posts, Dad's voicemail from the week before saying, "Could you just let Lucas put your name on the supervision line until the review is done? We all know you will help." I saved it because my family had trained me never to trust memory after dinner. Then I wrapped the silver chapel key in my handkerchief and drove to the funeral home. Olivia met me before I reached the chapel doors. She wore a black dress, pearls, and the soft expression of someone performing reverence for a camera. In her hands was a leather guest book. "We're having the family sign a remembrance book for Grandpa before the ceremony," she said. Her phone was angled low but recording. The top page held a printed line about legacy and compassion. Under it, folded once, was a supervising director acknowledgement stating, "I accepted responsibility for case file review, embalming authorizations, cremation permits, transfer logs, and prepaid contract controls submitted to the state board." My signature line had a small silver tab. I looked at her. "This is not a remembrance book." Her smile tightened. "It just confirms the role you already played." I played a draft role. Lucas stepped beside her with the funeral home keys in his hand. "Hannah, please, not today." "Then why did you put my license in a state board file today?" His face changed. One flash, enough. Mom came up behind him, voice sharp under the whisper. "Do not embarrass him in front of families." I looked past her at Mrs. Porter sitting near the front row with a folded tissue in both hands. Families are exactly why I'm starting. The reopening was built to make refusal look cruel. White flowers, soft piano, staff in black suits, clergy waiting near the side aisle, a local reporter, prepaid clients who wanted to know whether their old contracts were still safe. 2 families with active cases. Olivia's live stream audience. Lucas stood under the banner and spoke about restoring dignity, honoring Grandpa Samuel, and bringing compassion back to Savannah families. He was good. That was the dangerous part. He could sound like a promise. He thanked Dad for the legacy, Mom for believing in him, Olivia for the vision, and Hannah for helping with flowers and family touches over the years. Flowers and family touches. My authorization forms were in his state packet. My case file system sat behind the arrangement desk. My forged signature was holding open the embalming room. Then Mom said her line. Hannah only arranged flowers. Lucas was the one with the heart to comfort people. A few people nodded. Mrs. Porter looked at me with tired kindness because grieving people often try to make peace with rooms that do not deserve it. Maribel Grant walked in during the last words. She did not nod. Before Lucas could cut the ribbon, Maribel stepped toward the arrangement office with her tablet. Before this facility operates under the submitted supervising-director packet, she said, I need to verify the license acknowledgement. Lucas smiled too quickly. Of course, we are fully prepared. Maribel looked at the tablet. Hannah Reed is listed as supervising funeral director. Olivia said, Yes, Hannah helped us prepare everything. I stepped forward. I did not approve the submitted packet. The piano stopped. Somewhere in the hallway, a flower cooler hummed louder than the room. Lucas gave a soft laugh, the one he used with grieving families when he wanted them to relax. She means she helped with earlier drafts. I opened the black folder on the guest book table and placed my refusal email beside the forged acknowledgement. This says, Do not use my license, name, or signature. This is what was uploaded. Maribel compared them. The signature was uploaded from the funeral home office computer and was not verified through Hannah Reed's board account. First proof slap. Quiet, official, final enough to shift every face in the room. Mom moved forward. This is a family misunderstanding. Hannah has always helped here. Maribel did not look at her. A supervising license is not a family misunderstanding. I pulled out the unpaid penalty receipts. These are board penalties I paid so the old license history would not block review. Then the corrected case file list. These are 29 errors I fixed. Then the death certificate corrections. 11 families needed these fixed. Then the cremation warnings. 2 cases almost moved before proper authorization. A prepaid client in the second row whispered, What does that mean? I said, It means consent matters after death just as much as before. Mrs. Porter looked down at her tissue. Lucas's smile was gone. Maribel opened the active case section. Mrs. Elaine Porter's file lists embalming authorization reviewed by Hannah Reed. Mrs. Porter looked up sharply. Her daughter stood beside her. I turned toward her gently. Mrs. Porter, I have not reviewed your husband's final authorization. She whispered, They told me everything was ready. Lucas stepped forward. It is ready. Hannah helped build the form. Maribel looked at him. Did Hannah review this case? Lucas said, Her system did. Maribel said, A system does not sign a consent form. Second proof slap. This one had a widow in the room. Mrs. Porter's daughter placed a protective hand on her mother's shoulder. The air changed. Until then, some people could pretend this was sibling jealousy. A widow's husband made that impossible. I placed the cremation permit email on the table next. 2 pending permits were marked ready before I saw the final authorizing agent checks. Maribel opened the file. Permit access listed under Supervising Director Hannah Reed. I said, Not authorized. Olivia whispered, They were routine. Maribel turned to her. No final disposition is routine to the family signing it. Third proof slap. Olivia's legacy brand smile disappeared. The local reporter stopped pretending not to record. Mom hissed, "Hannah, stop." I looked at her. "You told them I only arranged flowers. Let's talk about the forms Lucas needed my name for." Dad finally lifted his head. He looked old, smaller than the man who had once stood in that chapel beside Grandpa. Maribel asked him, "Mr. Reed, did Hannah Reed maintain compliance records for this facility?" Mom whispered, "Martin." Dad closed his eyes, then opened them. "Yes." The room went still. He continued, voice rough. "She paid the penalties. She fixed the files. She stopped cases when authorization was wrong. Lucas did not do that." Lucas looked at him like he had been slapped. Mom said, "You are humiliating your son." Dad said, "We already humiliated our daughter." It was the first useful sentence he had spoken in years. Lucas tried the old frame. "Hannah is jealous because families trust me." I held up the silver chapel key. "Families trust this building. You used that trust and my license." He said I had no warmth. I said, "Warmth without consent is not care." Maribel nodded once, not because she cared about the family argument, but because she understood the rule behind the words. Then she asked the question that broke the room. "Who uploaded Hannah Reed's signature?" Lucas looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Mom. Mom looked at Dad. Dad stared at Grandpa's photograph. The family avoidance chain had never looked uglier. Lucas said, "Olivia handled some office filings." Olivia's mouth opened. "You told me she agreed." Lucas snapped, "Not here." Not here was always where truth finally arrived wearing a badge. Maribel turned to Olivia. "Did Hannah sign this in your presence?" Olivia swallowed. "She helped with the documents." Maribel repeated, "Did she sign?" Silence spread from the chapel doors to the flower cooler. Finally, Olivia whispered, "No." That one word did not fix the cases. It did not undo the marketing. It did not protect Mrs. Porter from what she had already heard. But it entered the record. In funeral work, the record matters because people in grief cannot be asked to reconstruct the truth later. Maribel placed the funeral home's reopening under license hold, pending supervising director verification, embalming authorization review, cremation permit audit, prepaid contract review, body transfer log inspection, and case file correction. No embalming or cremation work could proceed under the disputed packet. Active families had to be notified. Prepaid clients had to be given corrected information. Vendor accounts tied to the license approval would be reviewed. The ribbon stayed uncut. Lucas's hand loosened around the keys. They fell onto the chapel floor with a small metallic sound that made several people flinch. Mrs. Porter began to cry then. Not loudly. That would have been easier for my mother to label emotional. This was worse. Quiet, controlled, exhausted crying from a woman who had already lost her husband and now had to ask whether the funeral home had been honest about the paperwork that touched his body. I walked to her before Lucas could turn it into comfort theater. "Mrs. Porter, this is not your fault," I said. "Do not sign anything else today until the board verifies your file and your daughter reviews the authorizations with you." She nodded once, gripping her daughter's hand. Lucas looked furious. Not because she was hurt, because I had spoken to her without letting him perform compassion over the wound he caused. The arrangement office became the second truth room. Maribel asked Lucas, Olivia, Mom, Dad, me, Mrs. Porter and her daughter, one prepaid client representative, and the office manager to step inside. I insisted the door stay open. Closed rooms had protected Lucas long enough. The office still had Grandpa's old wooden desk, though Olivia had placed a ceramic angel and a branded candle on it. Maribel laid out the timeline. Hannah listed as supervising director. Signature not verified. 6 active cases under review. 3 prepaid contracts with ledger questions. 2 cremation permits pending. Body transfer logs updated through Hannah's system but submitted under Lucas's office. Embalming authorization packet uploaded from the funeral home computer. Refusal emails from Hannah. Signature copied from a vendor form. Then she asked Lucas directly, "Did Hannah Reed authorize the use of her license in this packet?" Lucas stared at the desk. "She built the system." Maribel repeated, "Did she authorize the license use?" He looked at Dad, then away. "No." 1 syllable. Late. Official. Necessary. Mom started crying. "He only wanted to keep your grandfather's funeral home alive." I said, "Then he should not have risked the families inside it." She snapped, "You always make grief about rules." I looked at Mrs. Porter. Rules are why grieving people do not have to guess what happened. The office manager, a woman named Denise, who had worked part-time at the old home, cleared her throat. "Hannah trained us on authorization order last month." Everyone turned. Denise looked terrified but kept speaking. She said not to process cremation permits until the legal agent was confirmed. I told Lucas the Porter file still needed final review. Lucas muttered, "Denise, not now." She said, "It matters now." 4th proof slap. Better than anything in my folder because it came from staff. Maribel wrote it down. The prepaid client representative asked whether old contract funds were safe. I opened the ledger corrections. 3 accounts needed reconciliation. I flagged them before reopening. Lucas said, "They were being handled." I placed his text beside the ledger. "Can we just say the ledger is clean for the opening and fix it next week?" Maribel read it, then looked at him. Prepaid funeral contracts cannot be represented as reconciled before reconciliation. 5th proof slap. Money, consent, death, and trust all sat on Grandpa's desk at once. Olivia covered her mouth. Her live stream had ended, but the damage was already alive. By 3:40, the reopening had become an audit. Families were pulled aside gently. No bodies were moved without board review. Mrs. Porter's file was paused until proper authorization could be verified. Cremation permits were suspended. Staff were told not to represent Lucas as supervising director until approval. The reporter left with a careful story. Olivia deleted posts calling Lucas Savannah's most trusted funeral director. Deletion is not disappearance. The state board had screenshots. I had screenshots. Families had questions. In death care, questions travel quietly and do not stop. Lucas found me near the chapel side door after most guests left. The silver key was still in my hand. "You got what you wanted," he said. I looked at the uncut ribbon. "No, I got what you filed. You could have pulled me aside. I emailed you for months. You know what I mean." "Yes, you mean I should have protected your image after you used my license." His eyes hardened. "Families like me. They do not want your cold little forms." I looked toward the arrangement office where Mrs. Porter's daughter was speaking with Maribel. "Families want to trust the person touching their dead." He flinched. I did not soften it. Death care is no place for soft lies. Mom called me cruel before I left. She said Grandpa would be ashamed of me. I held up his silver chapel key. Grandpa taught me consent before comfort. Dad looked at the key and covered his face. Mom said I had destroyed Lucas's future. I said Lucas had gambled family's grief on a forged license. She said I had no heart. I said, then why did he need my name to borrow one? That was the first time she had no answer. The formal board review happened the following week in a conference room with gray chairs and a clock that ticked too loudly. Maribel sat at the head of the table. Lucas came with Olivia and an attorney. Mom came even though she had no official role. Dad came with printed emails and the old penalty receipts I had paid. Maribel reviewed everything. Hannah listed without verified consent. Forged signature uploaded from the funeral home office. Active cases submitted under disputed supervision. Cremation permit access not verified. Prepaid ledger incomplete. Body transfer logs corrected by Hannah but claimed by Lucas. Lucas admitted I had not signed. Olivia admitted she uploaded documents after Lucas said I had agreed. Mom tried to say funeral homes run on compassion. Maribel said, funeral homes run on lawful consent and licensed care. I wrote that sentence in the margin of my notes because Grandpa would have loved it. Reed Family Funeral Home was not permanently shut down. Real life rarely gives punishment that clean. The reopening was suspended under corrective action. Lucas could not serve as supervising director. An outside licensed director had to be hired. Active cases had to be reviewed. Mrs. Porter's authorizations had to be re-explained with her daughter present. The prepaid ledger had to be audited. Cremation permit procedures had to be rebuilt. Vendor accounts were held until the license structure was corrected. Olivia's legacy campaign collapsed. Lucas's first public story as compassionate director became Funeral Home Reopening Delayed After State Board License Questions. The article did not use the word forged in the headline. It did not need to. Funeral families read between lines faster than marketers think. The corrective period exposed more than the forged packet. It exposed how much of Lucas's compassion depended on someone else catching the dangerous parts before they reached families. The prepaid ledger had 2 duplicated credits, 1 missing trust account notice, and 1 contract Olivia had used in marketing without permission from the family. A body transfer log had a time entered from memory instead of the transport sheet. A cremation checklist had been simplified for staff training, but the simplified version removed the legal authority step I had written in bold. Lucas said those were small problems. Maribel said, small problems in funeral service become permanent because the person most affected cannot come back and complain.